Joining us now from Turkey is Mr. Matthew Bryza. He is a former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan, and also he was one of the co-chairs of the OSCE's Minsk group, meaning he was one of the three international mediators between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Thank you very much, Matthew. It's always great to have you on the program. Let me get your perspective. Let me get your perspective on this latest escalation of tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, you were closely involved in the mediation process. How are you looking at the latest developments?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me on, Jafar. It's reminiscent of the largest escalation in fighting since the ceasefire was signed back in 1994, and that occurred in 2016, the latest round of fighting. But this seems more serious. There was a Azerbaijani general that was killed. The weaponry used is heavy. I mean, it's artillery and tanks, grenade launchers. It seems that the emotions are running really high, as we saw in the last few days in Baku. Young men took to the streets saying that they wanted to go to war. And then they actually stormed the parliament in what seemed like a turning of the protests into something that might be anti-Azerbaijani government. So there's a great deal of uncertainty of what's going on, but it's serious fighting. I don't think it's going to escalate into all-out war, though, to pick up on the point that you made in the lead-in. And that's for a number of reasons. One is that the leaders of both countries know that it's so risky to actually go to war. They both face difficulties in managing the COVID-19 crisis. The opposition in both countries has been critical of their handling of the whole Nagorno-Karabakh issue, and then their militaries probably can't sustain all-out war. So I don't know if that's an optimistic point, because what worries me is simply that they're setting back the whole negotiating process, which got quite close to a framework agreement in 2009, but now is clearly off the rails.
All right, now, Matthew, let me get your perspective on Russia here. Now, Russia has two military bases in Armenia, and recently we have heard from Turkish authorities here that Armenia is not acting on its own. It's definitely being backed by some countries. So could that be Russia?
Oh, I definitely think so. Few points. Number one, yeah, Russia has a large military base in Gyumri. Number two, it was Russian weaponry way back when, in the early 1990s, when the war was in full pace between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Russian weapons magically went over to the Armenian side. So Russia has a long history of supporting the Armenian side, even though they're supposed to be an impartial mediator. On top of that, if you look back about 6 days before this latest clash, an influential member of the Russian lower house of parliament, or Duma, a gentleman named Konstantin Zatulin, who is the chairman of the committee on the CIS, or the Commonwealth of Independent States, which is what Russia likes to call its former constituent states of the Soviet Union. He made a very odd statement. Out of the blue, he said that Armenia is Russia's military ally. It's a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is Russia's attempt to create a military alliance out of the former Soviet states. So if any country, he didn't say who, but if any country were to attack Armenia, we will defend it with our troops that we have already based there.
Wow.
Yeah. And then he also said, look, I don't know what the status of Nagorno-Karabakh is. I mean, Prime Minister Pashinyan tells me that it's Armenian. The Azerbaijanis claim that it's Azerbaijani. Well, Mr. Zatulin, your country's policy is that Nagorno-Karabakh remains a part of Azerbaijan, even if it's occupied by Armenian military forces. So to me, that was really provocative, and I can't believe Mr. Zatulin would have just said that on his own.
I mean, this does sound quite alarming. Does that mean that Turkey and Russia can go at odds in Azerbaijan as well? Because already Turkey and Russia are at odds in Syria and in Libya. So would this be another front?
Yeah, I think it is. At least it's a political front. Because, as you know, the Turkish government came out, I mean, Minister Çavuşoğlu and President Erdogan in the last couple of days with some really forceful statements of support for Azerbaijan. And I heard Defense Minister Akar saying we consider ourselves one nation and two states, meaning Turkey and Azerbaijan, which is kind of an old adage. But for the first time, Turkey and Russia are now squaring off politically in Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. I'll also say that, in Libya, Turkish military, again, as you know, fought Russian troops and Assad's Syrian army to a standstill with a brilliant, innovative drone strike, and also did a similar thing in Libya. So I think that sort of military engagement is less likely in Nagorno-Karabakh. That is considered by Russia to be its special backyard. It does not want to be in a military conflict with a NATO ally in that territory. I think what Russia's game is simply to keep both parties kind of off balance and to remind Pashinyan that he's in Moscow's pocket. He can't really do anything without Russia approving it. I think also, finally, the overall Russian approach to this conflict for years has been try to avoid a big military or a resumption of military conflict, but also keep both parties off balance by never really getting to the end of a negotiated settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict.
Okay, now, Matthew, you were one of the three international mediators, so you're one of the best persons to ask this question. What is the solution to this problem? Because clearly Azerbaijan is not going to back off. It is their legal territory, and Russia has not been an impartial mediator. So how is this problem going to be solved?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can say that during my time as a mediator, the Russian side was absolutely constructive. And I had a lot of meetings with my Russian counterpart and French counterpart, but with Minister of Foreign Affairs Lavrov, he was creative. He was helpful. He seemed sincerely to want to get to an agreement. And then President Medvedev was also the same, creative, constructive. And so what that led to, that sort of positive attitude, was something called the Madrid document. That was an agreement in principle that the two sides hammered out. I guess it was in November of 2008. And it provides a viable framework agreement. I could go into the details, but I don't want to, blow everybody's time. But it was something that President Aliyev and then President Sarkisyan of Armenia agreed to in principle, to us, the co-chairs, in private. But they also said, we're not ready to talk about this in public, that we agree, because there's still some specific details we have to work out. So that document's been on the table for a while. The leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia to this point haven't had sufficient confidence to finalize that agreement. But last year, something very positive happened. There were a couple of meetings between President Aliyev and then Nikol Pashinyan at the time, I guess it was just before his prime minister was president at the time. They agreed that they needed to try to re-energize the negotiations, prepare their populations for peace, and then also to strengthen the ceasefire agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia along what's called the line of contact within Azerbaijan. That was very hopeful. But then a few months ago, Prime Minister Pashinyan changed course 180 degrees, and he said, I don't believe in those Madrid principles anymore. I think we should maybe start over, start fresh. Nagorno-Karabakh is part of Armenia. And then he said, but it's also independent, so that's contradictory. He would only reverse course and make those contradictory statements under intense pressure. I think he's facing internal pressure from his political opposition and maybe also from certain elements in Moscow. I'm not saying necessarily President Putin, but I think there are interests in Moscow that just don't want to see officially peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Now, Matthew, my last question to you here. Do you think Russia is trying to provoke this conflict so that the status quo can be maintained?
Yes, I do. So for exactly the reason you said, Jafar, so the status quo can be maintained. If there is an agreement, then Russia has a much lower ability to manipulate the situation and to exert leverage on the two parties. So, yeah, I think that's part of what's happening. And behind the scenes, by the way, there's a lot of just raw greed involved. I mean, Russia or Russian companies own basically, Armenia's entire energy system. Gazprom owns all the pipelines, and others own the electricity system. Others own other major bits of infrastructure like the railroads in Armenia from Russia. I mean, and by the way, Armenia's entire border guard network is Russian. It's under the command of the Russian military, and Armenia's airspace is actually integrated into Russia's air defense system. So the Armenian government doesn't have a lot of maneuver room away from Russia.
All right, Matthew Bryza, thank you very much for talking to us on The Brief. As always, we really appreciate your analysis, and I'm really happy to see you safe and sound. Thank you very much once again.
Gafar, thank you. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
You too. You too. Take care.